All right, get ready to dive into Greek Lessons by Kang.
Oh, this one's going to be fascinating.
It really is. The premise alone is just captivating.
Definitely. It's a silent woman
Yeah.
and a man slowly losing his sight.
Wow.
And they find connection in, of all places, a Greek class.
Exactly.
I mean,
Makes you think about communication in a whole new way. It's like Kang is saying, okay, here are all your assumptions. Let's just toss them out the window.
right. It's brilliant. And that's why this deep dive is going to be so interesting. It's like this puzzle box of language, silence, human connection.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. First things first. Why is this woman silent? I mean, is it a medical condition or is there something more to it?
So it's not a physical issue. It's like 20 years before the novel starts, she goes through this trauma,
Okay.
and it's triggered by a single word, bibliothèque.
Bibliothèque, that's French, right? For library.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm even more curious now. What
Yeah.
could be so traumatic about a library? I mean, I practically grew up in one.
Yeah, see, it's not about the place itself, but the word. Some words just hit you in a certain way.
Oh, totally. I know exactly what you mean.
So for her, bibliothèque, the sound of it, the way it's spelled, the meaning, all of it just like came crashing together, and it triggered something deeply unsettling in her, almost transgressive.
Wow. It's like the word itself became the symbol of something she couldn't deal with.
Yes, exactly.
And so her silence became like her defense mechanism.
Yeah, and this whole idea of language being both a bridge and a barrier.
Yeah.
It runs throughout the whole novel.
That's so true. We rely on words to connect, but then sometimes words can also hurt us, silence us even.
Right. Define us in ways we don't want.
Absolutely. So if she can't speak, how does she communicate? Does she use sign language or write everything down?
She mostly communicates by writing. She carries around a notebook and pencil everywhere.
Oh, I can picture that, like always ready to jot something down.
Yeah, yeah. And there's this fascinating detail about her gaze. She describes it as the most instantaneous and intuitive form of touch.
Wow. It's like she's trying to connect without actually touching, you know, using her eyes to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
But even though she finds these other ways to express herself, there's this sense that she's struggling, right? Like deep down, she wants to be able to speak.
Oh, absolutely.
It,
She desperately wants to regain her voice.
yeah.
Especially she wants to connect with her son, who she's lost custody of.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, there's this scene where she's trying to call him from a public phone.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
He can only make these wordless sounds.
Wow.
It's really powerful. It's like her silence is this wall between them.
It makes you realize how much we take speaking for granted. You
Yeah.
know, it shapes our relationships, our identity, everything.
For sure. So the question is, how does she end up in this Greek class? It's not explicitly stated in what we have.
Right.
I mean, she was a writer and teacher before her silence, so maybe it's her way to re-engage with language, even though she can't speak it.
Yeah, like she's trying to rebuild that bridge brick by brick. And speaking of bridges, there's this interesting parallel between her silence and the man's impending blindness. It's like they're both experiencing a loss of a crucial sense.
And it's fascinating how Kang uses that shared sensory deprivation to create a connection between them. The man teaches ancient Greek,
Uh-huh.
and he seems totally resigned to his fate, even finding a kind of strange beauty in losing his sight.
Okay, now that's interesting. I mean, most people would be terrified of going blind,
Right.
but he's finding meaning in it.
Yeah, it's like he's preparing himself for a different way of seeing the world.
And that's where his backstory comes into play, right? He talks about falling in love with a deaf woman in Germany.
Exactly.
He even learned sign language to communicate with her.
Sadly, the relationship ended, but the experience it really left a mark on him.
So he's already familiar with navigating the world of silence,
Yeah.
finding ways to connect beyond spoken language.
Right.
And now with his student, he's sort of revisiting that world, but from a different perspective.
It's like he's coming full circle.
Exactly. And there's this feeling that he sees a reflection of his past love in his student's silence. It's not just that she can't speak, it's the depth of emotion she conveys without words. Like her silence speaks volumes.
Right. It's like they're both grappling with loss and searching for connection, but in these very different ways, through their senses.
And it's all happening within the very structured setting of this Greek class.
Right.
What do you think the significance of that is? Is it just a random backdrop, or is there something more to it?
Oh, there's definitely more to it. Ancient Greek itself is a language rooted in philosophy, mythology, history. Carries so much weight.
So it's not just about learning grammar and vocabulary.
No, no, it's about tapping into a whole different way of thinking, of seeing the world.
And then there's that part in the source material where it talks about how a single Korean word can encompass both brightness and hue.
Oh, yes.
In English, we need two separate words for those concepts.
Exactly. It just highlights how much language shapes our perception of reality.
It really does.
Mhm.
So the Greek class isn't just about exploring language, theoretically.
Right.
It's also where these two characters' lives intersect.
It's like this confined space, this microcosm where their struggles and desires play out.
Yeah.
He's drawn to her silence. He sees echoes of his past, and he's wrestling with his own fears. And she's surrounded by a language she can't speak.
Right.
She's confronting the power of words and that longing to reclaim her own voice.
It's like the Greek lessons themselves become this catalyst,
Yeah.
forcing them to confront their pasts and, reevaluate their relationship to language, to each other, to the world.
And to themselves.
This is already so much to unpack, but before we go any further, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dig into the man's letters to his sister.
Okay.
They seem to hold a lot of clues about his past and his motivations. Don't go anywhere.
Sounds good.
Okay, we're back. And now we're going to delve into the man's letters to his sister Ran. They're so personal, like reading his diary. He talks about his life, his past, his fears about going blind.
It's interesting how he uses those letters to explore his own relationship with language and identity. Remember, he grew up between Korea and Germany.
Right.
So he's always in between these two cultures, these two languages.
He describes his life as being cloven in two, which is such a striking image. It's like he doesn't belong anywhere.
Yeah, you really sense that tension in his writing. He talks about choosing to go back to Korea, his mother tongue, even though he knew his sight would get worse there.
It's like he's trading one kind of vision for another, giving up his physical sight to gain a deeper connection to his roots.
Exactly. But even with his family, there's this underlying tension, especially with his sister Ran.
Yeah, their relationship is complicated. It's clear he loves her, but there's also some resentment there, like that part where he talks about the relatives comparing them, saying the brother might as well be a girl and the little sister a boy. It suggests this unspoken competition between them.
Like they were forced into these roles based on their gender that neither of them really fit into.
And that struggle for identity, for acceptance, it seems to connect to the broader themes of language and silence in the book.
It does, doesn't it? He remembers Ran struggling with singing, even though she was naturally gifted. She said the silence between her body and the song she was about to sing felt as terrifying as a precipice.
Wow, that's powerful. It's that fear of not being able to express yourself, of not living up to your potential.
And, it makes me think about the man's own fear of losing his sight.
Yeah, it's like he's facing a different kind of silence, the silence of the visual world.
Exactly. They're both wrestling with these limitations, these barriers to expression. And it's like they're both drawn to people who embody silence, in a way.
You mean like the man and his deaf former lover and his silent student?
Yes. And Ran maybe to her silent brother.
Okay, I see the connection. They're searching for something in silence that they can't find in the world of sound and sight. But let's go back to that first love in Germany, the deaf woman. He keeps going back to that relationship in his letters, trying to figure it out.
That relationship really shaped him. It influenced his views on communication and connection. He was so drawn to her silence, just like he's drawn to his student's silence now. But that relationship ended badly. There was pain, even violence.
It's like he's haunted by his past, afraid of making the same mistakes, which makes his connection with his student even more interesting. It's like he's walking this tightrope, attracted to her silence, but also scared of getting too close.
Right. He's caught between desire and fear. He wants to understand her, but he's holding back, afraid to be vulnerable again.
And it's not just a romantic connection, is it? They're both dealing with these huge questions about life and death, about reality itself even.
You're right. Kang isn't afraid to explore those big philosophical ideas, and she does it in a way that feels so natural. Like that part where he talks about Plato's concept of the forms. Do you know about that?
Vaguely, philosophy isn't really my thing.
Basically, Plato thought there's this perfect eternal world of ideas that exists beyond the physical world, and he called these perfect ideas forms.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. The man who's losing his sight is kind of preparing to enter a different realm of perception, maybe closer to those forms that Plato talked about.
That's it. And the woman, living in her world of silence, she already exists in a space that goes beyond normal language.
Hmm.
They're both exploring these different ways of knowing and being, challenging how we use our senses.
It's amazing how Kang combines those philosophical ideas with real human experiences. It's not just abstract theories, it's about how these ideas impact people's lives.
Exactly. And the way she describes the man's vision deteriorating is so powerful. He sees the world as hazily bright, shaded. It's so vivid. You can feel both the physical and emotional impact of his experience.
And the symbolism, that scene with the bird trapped in the academy building, it's like a metaphor for the woman's silenced voice and the man's fading sight.
Yes, they're both trapped, wanting to be free.
Yeah.
And like the bird finally escaping, I think both characters will find their own freedom, even if it's not what we expect.
Okay, let's talk about the ending. It's both beautiful and a little unsettling. They're in his apartment, it's raining, and he's imagining all these vivid images, a rose, a watermelon, snowflakes, even a woman from his past.
It's like he's describing the world he's losing, but also, maybe, the world he's entering. A world where his sight doesn't limit him, where his memories and imagination come alive.
He says that at a certain point, he will only see when he dreams. Then he touches her face, kisses her, and compares it to sunspots.
Sunspots, those dark, hot areas on the sun's surface. It's like this intense, dangerous beauty, something you can only see through a filter.
Right. It's both romantic and scary. Like he's drawn to this new way of experiencing the world, this new closeness with her. And then she speaks for the first time she makes a sound. But we don't know what she says.
And that's where we leave off. It's such a great cliffhanger. She's finally broken through the silence, but what will she say? What happens next?
Yeah.
I just want to keep reading.
It makes you want to go back and reread the whole thing to look for clues, hidden meanings. But that's what's so brilliant about this book. It doesn't give us easy answers. It just gives us these ideas to wrestle with.
It's a novel that sticks with you. It makes you think differently about silence, language, loss, connection.
Okay, before we wrap things up, let's revisit that final scene at his apartment where she helps him get ready to go to the optician. It seems simple, but I think there's a lot more going on there.
I agree. It brings the story full circle and shows how much they've both changed.
It's like poetry in motion, you know? That scene where she helps him get ready.
It really is, yeah. There's so much tenderness there.
Yeah, and symbolism.
Right, like he's the teacher in the beginning, welcoming her to his class. But now he's vulnerable.
Yeah,
He needs her help.
exactly. He's literally in the dark, both physically and, emotionally. And she's the one leading him through it.
And think about how they communicate now. It's so different from those early days in the classroom.
Right. It's this intimate language they've created.
Touch, writing on his palm.
There's this beautiful line where he says, "The warm strokes and dots that had tickled over his left palm, the flesh remembers first." It's like language beyond words, you know?
It shows that language isn't just, spoken or written. We communicate in so many ways.
Totally. Like touch, gestures, even shared silences.
Exactly. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could.
That makes me think about the end of that last scene where she breaks her silence. We don't know what she says.
Right.
Maybe it doesn't even matter, Like the important thing is she spoke at all.
I think you're right. The whole book is full of these moments where they understand each other without words.
Yeah, and that final scene with her guiding him through the darkness, it's like the ultimate example of that.
Right.
It's just loaded with symbolism. The man who's losing his sight, led by the woman who couldn't speak. It's like Kang is saying, even in darkness, even in loss, there's still connection.
And hope.
Exactly. Hope for a different way of seeing, of being.
It's such a hopeful ending, even though we don't get all the answers,
It's true. They're both starting these new journeys, but they're not alone. They have each other and the special language they've built together.
A language of touch, understanding, shared silence.
It's beautiful, and I think that's what makes Greek lessons so powerful. It doesn't give us easy answers. It leaves us with these images, these questions that stay with us.
It makes you want to reread it to see if you missed anything.
Definitely. And to think about how these themes, silence, language, connection, how they show up in our own lives.
That's what good literature does.
So to wrap things up, we'll leave you with this. What if, instead of being afraid of silence, we embraced it? What if it's actually the most powerful language of all?
Beautiful.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Greek lessons. Until next time, keep exploring, keep thinking, keep listening.